4 men stood waiting at the altar, and I was about to marry all of them. But before I could say those vows, before I could learn what my body was truly built for, I had to escape the garden, where 4 women lay buried beneath roses that bloomed red each spring. Their only crime was marrying the man I was supposed to wed in 3 weeks. This is the story of how I, Evangeline Hartwell, became wife to 4 mountain men, how I discovered a life I never knew existed, how one of them died saving us all, and how I learned that sometimes the most scandalous choices lead to the most extraordinary lives. But before I tell you how it all began, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you are ready for a story that will shock you. Subscribe because I share true frontier confessions twice a week, and comment below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I love knowing my story reaches people everywhere who understand that love does not always follow the rules. Now let me take you back to Boston. October 1886, to the moment I unearthed a secret that would send me running into the arms of 4 strangers. I am 90 years old now, sitting in this Denver nursing home with winter pressing against the windows. The radiator clicks and hisses in the corner like some tired old animal trying to keep warm, and outside the glass, snow falls in thick curtains across a city I barely recognize anymore. Denver has grown tall and loud since I first passed through it on a stagecoach in 1887. Back then it was mud streets and cattle smell and men with revolvers on their hips. Now it is automobiles and electric lights and young people walking fast with their eyes pointed at the ground. But some things do not change. Snow still falls the same way it did 70 years ago. And memory does not care about time at all. My granddaughter Rosalind found the leather journal yesterday. She was helping the nurses organize my things, moving me from the room on the 3rd floor to the smaller one on the 2nd because my legs do not carry me upstairs anymore. She was sorting through the cedar chest I have kept locked for 7 decades, the one I told everyone contained old linens and nothing worth examining. Rosalind is 17. Curious the way only 17-year-olds can be all hunger and no fear. She has her great-uncle's eyes, though she does not know it. Dark brown, wide-set, full of a reckless light that makes my heart ache every time she looks at me. She opened the chest when I was sleeping. I know this because I woke to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor beside my bed, the journal open in her lap, her face the color of fresh milk. "Grandma," she whispered. Her voice was barely a sound. December 1886, the night I became wife to 4 men. She looked up at me with those eyes, those Phelan eyes. "This is you." I closed my eyes and I was 19 again, kneeling in Senator Prescott's garden with dirt under my fingernails and death in the soil. The October sun warm on the back of my neck, the smell of turned earth and dying leaves. And beneath it all, beneath the rich autumn perfume of a Boston garden in its final days of color, something else, something wrong. Let me tell you how a girl from Boston became a woman of the mountains. October 15th, 1886. The afternoon sun slanted through dying maple leaves as I knelt in the senator's garden, my skirts pooling in the October earth like spilled ink. The dress was my second-best dark blue cotton with white buttons my mother had sewn on by hand back when her hands still obeyed her. I did not want to ruin it, but my mother had sent me to dig tulip bulbs for the spring wedding, and the only dress suited for garden work was hanging on the line still wet from washing. The wedding, my wedding, 3 weeks away. I tried not to think about it as I worked the spade into the soil. The garden was beautiful, even in its autumn decline. Senator Prescott employed 2 full-time gardeners, Irishmen named Connolly and Burke, who kept the grounds immaculate from April through October and spent the winters drinking in a shed behind the carriage house. The rose beds were their pride. 6 varieties planted in concentric rings around a marble fountain that had been imported from Italy at a cost that could have fed my family for 5 years. The roses were dormant now, their canes bare and thorny, but in spring they bloomed with a violence of color that visitors remarked upon every year. Deep crimson, the red of arterial blood, so vivid they seemed almost unnatural. I would learn why they bloomed so red, but not yet. The spade bit deep into the soil near the eastern wall where my mother had told me the tulip bulbs were thickest. I was digging perhaps 2 feet down, deeper than tulips typically root, when the blade struck something that was not rock, not root, not the packed clay that lay beneath the garden's topsoil, something that gave under pressure, then cracked with a sound like breaking pottery. I paused, wiped my forehead with the back of my gloved hand. looked down into the hole I had dug. Something pale gleamed in the dark earth. My hands moved before my mind could catch up, brushing away soil with trembling fingers. The gloves came off without conscious thought, and then my bare hands were in the cold dirt, scraping, clearing, revealing. A skull grinned up at me from the earth. I should have screamed. Any sensible girl would have screamed, would have dropped the spade and run for the house, for the police, for anyone who could explain why there was a human skull buried 2 feet beneath Senator Prescott's prize-winning roses. But I did not scream, because something caught the fading afternoon light and held it. A gold locket still clasped around the cervical vertebrae, gleaming against the brown bone like a tiny fallen star. My hands moved without permission. They had stopped being my hands somehow and had become something else. Instruments of discovery, tools of truth. They reached down and lifted the locket from its resting place among the bones, and they opened it with a soft click that sounded loud as a gunshot in the silent garden. Inside, a photograph. A young woman in a wedding dress, her smile full of hope, and the particular brightness that belongs only to brides who believe in the promise they are about to make. Dark hair arranged in the fashion of 3 years prior. Eyes that, even in the tiny sepia image, seemed to sparkle with life. The inscription read, Margaret Prescott, 1883. Margaret Prescott, Victor Prescott's first wife. The one the family said had gone to visit relatives in Philadelphia and never returned. The one whose name was spoken in whispers at society gatherings, always accompanied by sad headshakes and vague references to women's nervous troubles. She had not gone to Philadelphia. She had gone into the ground right here beneath roses that bloomed red with her blood and bones. My hands were shaking now, a fine tremor that started in my fingers and worked its way up my arms into my shoulders. But I did not stop digging. Could not stop. Some terrible momentum had seized me, some need to know the full scope of what I had found. I dug deeper, not with the spade now, but with my bare hands tearing at the soil like an animal. The earth was cold and damp, and it packed under my fingernails, until my hands looked like they belonged to a gravedigger, which I suppose in that moment they did. Another skeleton lay beneath the first. Smaller the bones, more delicate, wearing a wedding ring with a small diamond that caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the dirt. Then another body, then another. 4 skeletons, 4 gold rings. 4 women who had worn white and promised forever to the man I was supposed to marry in 21 days. The garden spun around me. The roses, the marble fountain, the manicured hedges, all of it tilting and swaying as if the earth itself had grown sick with the weight of its secrets. I pressed my muddy hand to my mouth and tasted soil and copper, and something else, the metallic tang of pure animal terror. I ran. Mud caked my dress as I stumbled through the garden past the roses that bloomed so red each spring. Now I knew why. Now I knew what fertilized those magnificent blooms, what gave them their famous color, their unnatural vibrancy. The iron in human blood, the calcium in human bones, the slow, patient decomposition of 4 women who had loved the wrong man. The library door was the closest entrance that locked from the inside. I threw myself through it and slammed it shut, turning the brass bolt with hands so slippery with mud and sweat that I nearly could not grip it. The lock engaged with a solid click, and I pressed my back against the oak panels as if I could somehow keep the horror outside in the garden where it belonged. My breath came in ragged gasps. My heart slammed against my ribs like something caged and desperate. Through the window I could see the garden peaceful and golden in the slanting light, betraying nothing of what lay beneath. That is when I found his journal. I was not looking for it. I was looking for something to press against the door, some heavy piece of furniture I could drag into place as a barricade, though, against what I could not have said. The dead do not open doors. It was the living I should have feared. The journal was tucked behind a leather-bound edition of Dante's Inferno on the shelf beside the senator's desk. How fitting. A thin notebook, perhaps 40 pages, bound in dark brown leather, with no title or marking on the cover. Just Victor Prescott's precise handwriting, filling every page, the letters small and neat, and perfectly formed, the penmanship of a man educated at Harvard and trained to present an impeccable surface to the world. The safe stood open beside his desk. The senator had left it ajar, forgotten in his confidence or carelessness. The kind of small mistake that only a man who has never faced consequences would make. A man so protected by wealth and position and his father's power that he had grown lazy with his secrets. My muddy hands left dark prints on the leather cover as I opened it. I remember thinking distantly that I was contaminating evidence, that a policeman would someday note these prints and wonder whose they were. But I could not have stopped reading any more than I could have stopped breathing. The first entry was dated 3 years prior. Wife number one would not stop crying after discovering my particular tastes. I tried to be patient. I gave her time. I explained that a wife's duty is submission, that her tears were an insult to the institution of marriage. But her constant weeping became insufferable. Father agreed. He helped me dig the hole in the east garden. We planted roses the next day. They bloomed beautifully that spring. I pressed my hand harder against my mouth. My stomach heaved and I tasted bile at the back of my throat. But I kept reading because the truth, once you have tasted it, demands to be swallowed whole. The second entry, dated 18 months ago, was worse. Margaret was more resilient than the first. She lasted nearly a year before threatening to go to the authorities. She had spirit, I will grant her that. Almost a shame. But I could not allow her threats to materialize. The West Garden this time. I am becoming quite efficient at this. Father barely needed to help at all. 2 more entries followed. 2 more women, 2 more gardens, 2 more sets of roses that would bloom impossibly red come spring. The third wife lasted only 4 months. The fourth barely 6 weeks. Victor was growing impatient, the journal noted, with clinical detachment, growing less tolerant of imperfection, growing more confident in his ability to make problems disappear beneath the beautiful manicured surface of his family's estate. The final page of the journal was blank except for 5 words and a date. Evangeline Hartwell, November 20th. My name, my wedding day. I sat there on the library floor for what must have been an hour, though time had lost its meaning. The light changed from gold to amber to the deep purple of autumn twilight, and still I sat, the journal open in my lap, my muddy hands motionless on the pages. 5 women, 4 already in the ground. And I was number 5, scheduled to join them in 3 weeks. I was the perfect victim, and I understood this with a clarity that cut through my terror like a blade. My father, Captain Harold Hartwell, had drowned when his ship went down in a storm off Cape Cod 9 months earlier. He left behind $6,000 in debts that swallowed everything we owned. The house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry, even the piano I had played since I was 6 years old, the one my father bought when I mastered my first sonata, sold at auction to a family on Beacon Hill, who probably never learned its history. My mother was dying. Consumption had hollowed her out over the past year, turning her from a vibrant woman who once hosted dinner parties for 30 guests into a ghost who drifted through our rented rooms in a morphine haze, coughing blood into handkerchiefs she tried to hide from me. She had no family to turn to. Her parents were dead. Her only sister had married a missionary and disappeared into the African interior 15 years ago, never to be heard from again. Senator Prescott had offered hope. His infinite generosity, he called it. His Christian duty. His son Victor, recently widowed, he said, with a straight face, would marry me. The debts would disappear like morning fog. My mother would receive the best medical care money could buy. All I had to do was say I do and become Mrs. Victor Prescott, 5th of that name, though I was only supposed to know about one predecessor. I was the girl with no father, no money, no family to ask questions. The girl whose dying mother would agree to anything that promised medicine and warmth and a few more months of life. The girl nobody would miss if she simply vanished one day, the way Margaret vanished, the way the others vanished, absorbed into the dark earth of Senator Prescott's garden. The perfect victim, 3 weeks until the wedding, 21 days to escape or die. I replaced the journal exactly where I had found it, behind the Dante, making sure the spine aligned with the other books on the shelf. I wiped my muddy fingerprints from the safe with my skirt. I smoothed the soil on the library carpet as best I could, knowing the maid would clean it in the morning and think nothing of it. Then I walked home through the darkening streets of Boston, my mud-stained dress hidden beneath my coat, my face arranged in the pleasant, neutral expression I had perfected over months of smiling at Victor Prescott across dinner tables, while his dark eyes watched me with the patient calculation of a predator who knows his prey cannot run. My mother was asleep when I arrived. The morphine the senator's doctor prescribed kept her unconscious for 12 hours at a stretch. Now her breathing shallow and rattling, her face on the pillow, so thin I could see the shape of her skull beneath the skin. I stood in her doorway and watched her breathe and thought about the skulls in the garden and wondered if I would look like that, skeletal and peaceful, when they found me beneath the roses in some future spring. No, I would not, because I was not going to let them plant me. I sat at the writing desk in my bedroom that night with the door closed and the lamp turned low. The house creaked and settled around me, full of shadows and secrets. Through the window, I could see the distant silhouette of the Prescott estate on the hill, its windows glowing with warm light. A beautiful house, a house of horrors wearing a mask of respectability. I opened the desk drawer and found the newspaper I had been using to press flowers. 6 months old, the pages yellow and brittle, the ink fading. I had saved it because the society column contained a mention of my engagement to Victor, and my mother had wanted to keep it as a memento. But it was not the society column I turned to now. It was the back pages, the ones crowded with advertisements for patent medicines and farmland auctions in mail-order catalogs. The pages nobody read except the desperate and the dreamers. I had seen the advertisement before weeks ago when I was pressing a sprig of lavender between the pages. I had read it then and thought it scandalous, amusing in its audacity, the kind of thing women whispered about at tea and pretended to be shocked by. Now I read it again, and it looked like salvation. Wanted one wife for 4 brothers. Caldwell brothers, ages 21 to 28, seek a woman of courage and character. Must accept unconventional arrangement, 1 woman, 4 husbands, shared in all ways. We offer protection, provision, and partnership on our mountain ranch. Wyoming Territory, Wolverine Creek. Reply to South Pass City Post Office, care of R. Caldwell. Serious inquiries only. 4 husbands, 1 woman, shared in all ways. The thought should have horrified me, should have sent me reaching for smelling salts and clutching my pearls and all the other reactions a well-bred Boston girl was supposed to have when confronted with something so far outside the boundaries of proper society that it might as well have arrived from another planet. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Not horror, not even shock. What I felt sitting at that desk with 4 skulls freshly burned into my memory was hope. Raw, desperate, illogical hope. Or perhaps it was desperation so profound that it wore hope's face the way a drowning person mistakes any floating object for a lifeboat, even if that object is strange and unlikely and nothing any reasonable person would cling to. 4 strangers in the Wyoming wilderness, or 1 monster in a Boston garden. 4 men who were honest about what they wanted, or 1 man who hid bodies beneath roses. The mathematics of survival are not complicated. You choose the option that does not end with you in the ground. I wrote carefully, choosing each word the way a carpenter chooses boards, testing them for strength before committing. My pen scratched across the paper in the quiet room, and each sentence felt like a step away from the grave Victor Prescott had already dug for me. Dear Caldwell brothers, I am Evangeline Hartwell, 19 years of age, educated at Miss Abernathy's Academy for Young Women. Healthy and in desperate circumstances. I cannot fully explain by letter. I am a virgin with no experience of men or marriage, but I am not naive about the world's cruelties. Your advertisement is unconventional, but I find myself in need of unconventional solutions. I must ask plainly, what does shared in all ways mean? I will not enter any arrangement under false pretenses, nor will I accept them. I bring no dowry save my education, my health, and my willingness to work harder than you might expect from a Boston girl. If you find me acceptable, I can arrive by mid-November. I have nowhere else to go, and I am running out of time. Respectfully, Evangeline Hartwell. I enclosed the studio portrait that had been taken for my engagement announcement, a photograph that showed me in profile, my blonde hair, arranged in the elaborate style my mother preferred, my expression carefully neutral. I looked young in that photograph, breakable, like a china doll in a parlor window, pretty and fragile, and designed to sit still and be admired. That photograph was a lie, but I did not know it yet. I would learn that I was not breakable at all, that I was made of something harder and stranger than porcelain, that the girl in the photograph and the woman I would become were separated by only 21 days and 1,000 miles, but might as well have been different species entirely. I mailed the letter the next morning, walking to the post office in the gray November drizzle telling my mother I was visiting the lending library to return an overdue book. The lie came easily, the way lies always come easily when they serve survival. I dropped the envelope into the brass mail slot and listened to it whisper down into the collection bag, and I thought about how a single piece of paper properly addressed could change the entire trajectory of a life. Then I walked home and waited. The days crawled past like wounded animals dragging themselves toward water. Each morning I woke with the weight of what I knew pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Each evening I lay down wondering if this was the night Victor would decide he could not wait for the wedding, could not wait 3 more weeks, 2 more weeks, 10 more days. He came to dinner 3 times that first week of waiting. Each time he arrived in his black carriage, his dark hair oiled and combed, his clothes immaculate, his smile perfectly calibrated to convey warmth and affection and absolutely nothing of what lay behind it. He brought flowers for my mother, white lilies, funeral flowers, though I doubted anyone else noticed the irony. He brought chocolates from the French confectioner on Tremont Street. He brought small, expensive gifts designed to remind us of his generosity, our dependency, the inescapable architecture of obligation that held us in place. Each time he watched me with those dark, calculating eyes. The eyes of a man who has done terrible things and discovered that terrible things are easy, that the world does not stop or even notice when 4 women disappear one by one into a garden that power and wealth and a senator father can make almost anything invisible. Once he cornered me in the hallway, moving so quickly and quietly that I did not hear him until his hand was already on my wrist. He pressed close enough that I could smell brandy on his breath, could feel the heat of his body through the thin fabric of my dress. His fingers wrapped around my wrist hard enough to bruise, and I felt the bones grind against each other under his grip. Soon, he whispered against my ear. His breath was hot and damp, and it made my skin crawl in ways I had no vocabulary for. Soon you will be mine, Evangeline. Legally, permanently. And then I will show you what a husband expects from his wife. I smiled, I nodded, I excused myself to be sick in the washroom, where I vomited as quietly as I could into the basin while gripping the edges of the porcelain so hard my knuckles turned white. When I returned, Victor was sitting with my mother in the parlor, reading poetry aloud in his cultured voice while she dozed in her chair. Keats, he was reading Keats. Ode to a Nightingale, the one about being half in love with easeful death. And I thought, this man buries his wives in his garden and reads poetry about death to my dying mother, and nobody in the world sees anything wrong with this picture. Nobody except me. The reply came 3 weeks after I mailed my letter. 3 weeks of smiling at Victor across dinner tables. 3 weeks of dodging his touches in hallways. 3 weeks of lying awake at night, listening to my mother cough and wondering which would kill me. First, Victor's hands, or the slow suffocation of having no choices left. The letter was waiting at the lending library, where I had arranged to collect my mail under the pretense of requesting books through the interlibrary loan program. The librarian, a kind woman named Miss Pritchard, who wore spectacles on a chain and smelled of lemon verbena, handed it to me with a knowing look that suggested she had her own opinions about young women who received mail from Wyoming territory. My hands shook so badly I could barely open the envelope. I sat in the reading alcove hidden behind a shelf of encyclopedias and read the letter twice before the words stopped swimming on the page. The letter was brief, written in a bold masculine hand that pressed so hard into the paper I could feel the indentations on the reverse side. A man who wrote the way he lived, I would learn, with force, with certainty, with no room for retreat. Miss Hartwell, you asked for plain truth. Here it is. You will be wife to all 4 of us. Not in name only, but in every way a woman can belong to a man. We will share your life. We will share your labor. We will share your loyalty, and we will earn it with ours. The law calls it bigamy. We call it family. You asked what shared in all ways means. It means everything. It means there is no part of this life that belongs to only one of us. If you cannot accept this, turn back now, and we wish you well. If you are brave enough, arrive South Pass City by November 15th. We marry November 18th. This is your last chance to run. Ronan Caldwell for my brothers. I read the letter 7 times. Each time the words landed harder, drove deeper, carved themselves into my understanding with the permanence of chisel marks in stone. 4 men, 1 woman. Everything shared. The implications were not subtle. These were not men offering me a position as housekeeper or ranch hand, or any other arrangement that might be explained away by necessity or convenience. They were offering marriage in its fullest sense multiplied by four. Four husbands, four sets of vows, four pairs of hands, and four hearts, and four lives braided into one. Heat flooded my face. A deep burning flush that started at my collarbones and climbed to my hairline, and beneath the embarrassment was something else. Something I did not have a name for at 19, but would learn to recognize later. Curiosity, hunger. The first faint stirring of a desire I had been taught to deny, to suppress, to pretend did not exist. I should not have felt curious. I should not have felt that strange flutter low in my belly, that quickening of breath, that sudden acute awareness of my own body sitting in the library chair. I should have felt only horror, only scandal, only the righteous indignation of a properly raised young woman confronted with an indecent proposition. But I had seen what lay buried in Senator Prescott's garden. I had read what Victor planned for his wives. I had felt his fingers grinding the bones of my wrists together while he whispered promises against my ear. Between horror and curiosity, between death and the unknown, curiosity seemed infinitely safer. I had 11 days to steal enough money and disappear. The senator kept a safe in his study, a heavy iron box made by the Mosler Company, painted black with gold lettering. I had watched him open it once from the hallway, standing just far enough back that my shadow did not fall across the threshold, memorizing the combination with the same concentration I had once applied to piano scales and French verb conjugations. 18 right, 4 left, 29 right. My father's death date. November the 18th, of all the cruel coincidences, the same day I was scheduled to marry the man who had chosen those numbers for his safe. The senator thought himself sentimental, choosing a date that connected his affairs to the tragedy that had delivered me into his family's hands. I thought him predictable. I waited until the household slept. My mother's morphine ensured her silence. The servants retired at 10. Victor did not live at the estate keeping rooms, instead at his club on Boylston Street, where he spent his evenings in pursuits I preferred not to imagine. The mansion creaked and settled around me as I crept down the stairs, my stockinged feet silent on the carpet runner. I avoided the fourth step that groaned under any weight, the eighth that squeaked regardless of where you placed your foot. Knowledge accumulated over months of visiting this house as Victor's intended. Knowledge that might save my life. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, stacks of bills in various denominations and a leather pouch containing gold coins. I counted quickly, my hands steady now, with the calm that descends when you have crossed the point of no return and there is nothing left to do but move forward. I took $400, precisely what my father's estate should have been worth before the senator's legal machinations had absorbed it into his own holdings. Before the debts that seemed to multiply mysteriously, the liens that appeared from nowhere, the legal fees that devoured everything until there was nothing left but a sick woman and her desperate daughter. Not theft, recovery of stolen property. That is what I told myself in the dark study, with the safe open before me and the moonlight falling through the window in pale bars. And I believed it because it was true, and because the truth matters even when you are taking money from a man's safe at midnight. I also took my mother's wedding ring, the one the senator had claimed as partial payment toward the debts. It had been my grandmother's before that, and her mother's before that, passed down through 3 generations of women who had actually chosen their husbands, who had married for love, or at least for mutual respect, and not because a senator's son needed a new victim to bury beneath his roses. The ring went into my pocket, small and warm against my thigh. A talisman, a promise to every woman in my family who had come before me that the chain would not end here in this dark house, in this garden of bones. I left a letter on my pillow. 4 sentences that cost me more pain than anything I had ever written, more than the letter to the Caldwell brothers, more than the diary entries I would eventually fill an entire leather journal with over 70 years of living. Mama, I have gone west. I will send money as soon as I can. I love you. Please forgive me. Please understand that I am not running away from you. I am running toward the only chance I have left. By dawn, I was on a train heading away from Boston, away from Victor Prescott's garden, away from the grave that had been waiting for me beneath the roses. The locomotive's whistle cut through the cold morning air like a scream, and the platform slid backward as the train gathered speed, and I watched the city of my birth grow smaller through the window until it was just a smudge on the horizon then a memory, then nothing at all. I did not cry. I wanted to. The pressure behind my eyes was enormous, a dam holding back an ocean of grief and fear and loss. But I had learned something in the past 3 weeks. Something about the architecture of survival. Tears are a luxury, and I could not afford luxuries. Not yet. Not until I was 1,000 miles away and standing in front of 4 strangers who had promised me something no one else in the world had bothered to offer. A choice, Wahun. The journey took 8 days. 8 days of watching America transform outside the window of a rail car that smelled of coal smoke and unwashed bodies and the particular staleness of air breathed by too many people in too small space. 8 days of pretending to be someone I was not. A widow traveling to meet relatives. A school teacher heading to a new position. The lies changed depending on who asked, and I discovered I was better at lying than I had ever imagined, which troubled me in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn when the train rocked through darkness and I had nothing to do but stare at my own reflection in the black glass and wonder who I was becoming. The landscape told its own story as the miles accumulated. Philadelphia's brick and cobblestone gave way to the rolling farmland of Pennsylvania, neat and ordered, and fenced every acre claimed and cultivated and bent to human will. Then the Alleghanies rose like a wall, and the train labored up grades so steep the engine seemed to groan with effort, and I watched forests of oak and maple scroll past their leaves turned to fire by the autumn cold. Beyond Pittsburgh, the land opened. Ohio spread flat and endless, under a sky so wide it made me dizzy. I had never seen so much sky. In Boston, buildings crowded the horizon and church steeples cut the blue into manageable pieces, and you always knew where you were because you could see the edges of things. But here the edges had been pushed back to infinity, and the sky went on until it swallowed the earth at some impossible distant point where they seemed to merge into a single unbroken line. Indiana, Illinois. The Mississippi River at dawn, wide and brown and ancient, carrying its burden of mud and history toward the Gulf. I pressed my face to the glass and watched it slide beneath the bridge, and I thought about how many people had crossed this river heading west, how many had been running towards something, how many had been running away. I was doing both. I shared a compartment with 3 other women and an older gentleman who introduced himself as a traveling salesman of dental instruments. The women rotated through the journey, boarding and departing at various stations, but one remained constant from Philadelphia all the way to the Nebraska border. Mrs. Odessa Crane was perhaps 60, though the frontier had a way of aging people beyond their years, and she might have been younger than she looked. She had kind eyes creased at the corners from decades of smiling, the deep lines that only form on faces that have laughed more than they have frowned. Her hands were roughened by work, the knuckles swollen, the fingers calloused, but she held her teacup with a delicacy that spoke of better days of a time before whatever circumstances had put those calluses on her palms. She wore a practical gray traveling dress and a hat with a single pheasant feather that had seen better days, and she carried a carpetbag with brass fittings that clinked softly whenever the train changed speed. She struck up conversation on the second day somewhere in the middle of Ohio when the flat sameness of the landscape had reduced everyone else in the compartment to glazed silence. "Where are you headed, dear?" Her voice carried the warmth of someone who had raised children and buried a husband and nursed neighbors through influenza and learned through all of it that kindness costs nothing and pays dividends no bank can calculate. "South Pass City," I answered carefully. I had rehearsed this. Had prepared a story about teaching school about a position arranged through correspondence. But something about Mrs. Crane's eyes, the way they looked at me without judgment, without calculation, without any of the measuring assessment I had grown accustomed to in Boston society, made the prepared lie feel wrong. Like wearing shoes that do not fit. Possible but painful. "I am to be married there," I said instead. "The truth or part of it." "How wonderful." Mrs. Crane's face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Is your intended a minor? Most young men in South Pass work the claims. Gold mostly, though. The easy pickings dried up years ago, and what is left takes more sweat than luck." "A rancher," I said. Then, because her eyes were so kind and I desperately needed someone to know the truth, needed to speak it aloud so it would become real, and not just words on paper exchanged between strangers, I added quietly, "Actually, 4 ranchers, 4 brothers." The compartment was empty except for the 2 of us. The dental instrument salesman had departed at Columbus, and the other women had not yet boarded. Just Mrs. Crane and me, surrounded by the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails and the vast Ohio emptiness, scrolling past the windows. Mrs. Crane's eyebrows rose. I watched them climb her forehead like two gray caterpillars ascending a hill, and I braced myself for the recoil, the pursed lips and averted eyes. The reaction any respectable woman was supposed to have. It did not come. 4 brothers and 1 bride, she said. Her voice was thoughtful, not shocked. The voice of a woman considering a mathematical problem, not a moral outrage. That is unusual, though I have heard of such arrangements out in the territories, where the law does not reach far and men outnumber women 20 to 1, and people make accommodations that would scandalize anyone east of the Mississippi. Relief flooded through me like warm water, loosening muscles I had not realized were clenched. You know what I am agreeing to? I asked quietly. 4 husbands means 4 men sharing everything. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to match mine, though there was no one to overhear. Including you. Their home, their table, their labor, their bed, everything dear. You understand that heat crept up my neck. I have considered it. Have you? Her eyes searched my face with an intensity that reminded me suddenly of my mother in the days before the morphine, when she still had the energy to worry about me. Because considering it in the abstract, reading words on a page is not the same as living it. These will be real men with real hands and real expectations, and you will be one woman alone in a wilderness, with no neighbors close enough to hear you call for help. I know. Then why? She sat back, her hands folded in her lap. A girl like you, educated, well-spoken, clearly from a good family. You could find a husband in any city in America. A proper husband, singular, with a house and a fence and a church pew with your name on it. Why 4 strangers in Wyoming? And because her eyes held no judgment, only concern, because she was the first person in months who had looked at me and seen a human being rather than a commodity or a victim or a problem to be solved, I told her everything. My father's death, the debts that swallowed our lives. My mother's consumption, the slow drowning in her own lungs that no amount of money could reverse, but that money could at least make bearable. Senator Prescott's generosity that was not generous at all, but calculated, predatory, designed to deliver a desperate girl into his son's hands. And then I told her about the garden. I spoke in a low, steady voice that did not sound like mine. I described the spade striking bone, the skull grinning from the earth, the gold locket with Margaret Prescott's photograph, the bride who never made it to Philadelphia. 4 bodies in 4 gardens, 4 women who had worn white and said I do and believed they were beginning their lives when in fact they were ending them. I told her about the journal, Victor's precise handwriting, the clinical notes about disposing of wives the way a farmer might note the disposition of livestock. Wife number 1 would not stop crying. Margaret was more resilient. I am becoming quite efficient. And the last page, my name, my wedding date, the blank space that was waiting to be filled with the details of my murder. By the time I finished, the Ohio farmland had given way to Indiana, and Mrs. Crane's face had gone pale beneath its weathering. Her hands, which had been resting in her lap, now gripped each other tightly, the knuckles white. Sweet Jesus, she breathed. It was not profanity. It was prayer. You are running for your life. Yes. And these 4 brothers. They know you are coming. They agreed to marry you. I showed her the letter. She read it twice, her lips moving slightly, the way people read when they want to make sure they have caught every word. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and handed it back. Well, she said finally, they are direct. I will give them that. No silk curtains or fancy words. Just plain truth laid out like lumber for building. She paused, studying my face. The Caldwell boys. I know of them. My heart lurched. You do. South Pass City is where I live, child. I run a boarding house on Main Street, have done for 11 years, since my husband died and left me nothing but the building and a talent for cooking. The Caldwell brothers came through about 4 years back. Bought land up in the mountains, a piece of property so remote and steep that nobody else wanted it. Keep to themselves mostly. Come to town every 3 or 4 weeks for supplies. Pay their bills on time. Do not drink to excess, do not start fights, do not bother the women. What are they like? I asked. My voice came out smaller than I intended, the voice of a girl who has bet everything on a hand she has not yet seen. Hard men. Mrs. Crane said it matter-of-factly, the way you might describe the weather or the price of flour. A statement of condition, not judgment. But honest ones. There is a difference, between hard and cruel. Cruel men enjoy the pain they cause. Hard men have simply learned that the world does not care about comfort, and they have adjusted accordingly. Hard men, I repeated. The words felt strange in my mouth. I had known soft men all my life. Men in silk cravats who held doors open with manicured hands and spoke in modulated voices, and hid their cruelties behind walls of civility so thick you could not see the monster until it was too late. The frontier makes men hard, Mrs. Crane continued, especially up in those mountains. Winter comes early and stays late and does not care about your feelings. A hard frost in September can kill your garden. An early blizzard in October can kill your livestock. And the cold up there is something you have never experienced. It gets into your bones and stays there. And some morning as you wake up and every joint in your body feels like rusted iron and you get out of bed anyway because the alternative is freezing to death. Can I survive it? That depends on what you are made of. She looked at me with those measuring eyes, kind, but unflinching, the eyes of a woman who had watched the frontier sort people into those who endured and those who did not. The mountains do not care about your education or your upbringing or whether you can play piano or read French. They care about whether you can get up when the cold knocks you down, whether you can keep going when everything in you wants to quit. I straightened my spine, drew my shoulders back, met her gaze without flinching. I can be hard. Mrs. Crane smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that recognizes courage and simultaneously mourns its necessity. I believe you can. You have steel in you, child. I can see it. Most people would have fallen apart after finding bodies in a garden. You stole evidence and booked a train ticket. That is not the behavior of a delicate flower. What else can you tell me about them, the brothers? She considered for a moment, her head tilted slightly, the pheasant feather on her hat bobbing with the motion of the train. The oldest Ronin is the one you would notice first. Tall as a barn door, built like something God designed for pulling stumps. Has a scar on his face that would frighten children if he were not so careful about keeping his distance from them. He is the one who comes to town for supplies, usually alone. Speaks little, pays in cash, tips his hat to ladies on the street, but never stops to talk. And the others. The second one, Beckett, I have only seen a handful of times. Lean, dark eyes that seem to be taking notes on everything they see. Reminds me of a lawyer or a detective, someone whose profession requires attention to detail. He is the one who handles their correspondence. His handwriting is precise. Hollis is the third, quieter than the others, gentler in his manner. He treated a miner's broken arm last year when the town doctor was drunk, which was not unusual, and did a better job than the doctor would have done sober. Someone said he was a field surgeon once, or a medic, or something military. He has the hands for it. Steady. And the youngest, Phelan. Mrs. Crane paused, and something flickered across her face, an expression I could not read. Phelan is the one most likely to smile at you. 21, maybe 22. Full of an energy that seems too large for his body. He reminds me of a horse that has not been ridden enough, all coiled power and restless movement. The kind of young man who would charge into a burning building without thinking about whether he could get out. Her voice had taken on a quality I would not understand until much later. A prescience, perhaps, or just the wisdom of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize the particular brightness that burns in people who are not destined to grow old. You know them better than you let on, I said. I know what I have observed, and I know what other people say, for whatever that is worth. The consensus in South Pass is that the Caldwell brothers are strange but fair, that they keep their word, that they work harder than any 4 men in the territory, and that whatever brought them to the Wusong Mountains, they have no intention of leaving. She reached across the narrow space between our seats and took my hand. Her grip was firm, her palm warm and dry. Listen to me, Evangeline. You are about to walk into something you cannot walk out of. These men will expect you to be their wife in every sense of that word. They will expect loyalty and labor in the kind of intimacy that no Boston finishing school prepares you for. If you are going to do this, do it with your eyes open and your spine straight and your mind made up. My eyes are open. Are they? Then look at me and tell me you understand that this is not a fairy tale, that there will be no carriage waiting to take you back to civilization if you decide you have made a mistake, that the nearest neighbor is probably an hour's ride away, and the nearest lawman is in South Pass, and the nearest city is a week's journey in good weather. I understand. And you are still going. I am still going because the alternative is a garden in Boston with 4 graves and a 5th one waiting for me. Mrs. Crane held my gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, a settling as if a question had been answered to her satisfaction. Then I will help you, she said. You will stay at my boarding house until the wedding. I will be your chaperone, your advisor, and if necessary, your defender. Whatever else those Caldwell boys are, they will treat you properly in my house, or they will answer to me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something crack in my chest, not breaking, opening, like a door that has been locked so long the hinges have rusted, finally giving way. Thank you, I whispered. Do not thank me yet, child. Thank me after you have survived your first winter in those mountains. The train pushed westward. Nebraska. The landscape stripped itself of trees and fences, and everything that suggested human habitation, leaving only grass and sky, an ocean of brown prairie, under a dome of gray November cloud. We passed homesteads that looked like wooden boxes dropped randomly on the infinite plain, their windows glowing with feeble light against the gathering dark. Smoke rose from their chimneys in thin columns that the wind snatched and scattered almost immediately, as if even fire could not hold its own against the emptiness out here. I watched and thought about the women in those homesteads. Women who had left everything familiar to follow men into the wilderness. Women who cooked and cleaned and bore children in sod houses and dugouts, and whatever shelter could be fashioned from a landscape that offered nothing willingly. Women who woke each morning to the same infinite horizon and found a reason to keep going. If they could do it, I could do it. That is what I told myself as the prairie scrolled past like an unending sermon on the subject of vastness. Wyoming territory announced itself with mountains. They appeared on the horizon like a promise or a threat depending on your disposition. Jagged peaks pushing up from the flat earth with a violence that suggested the land itself was in revolt. Snow covered their upper reaches, brilliant white against the steel gray sky, and as the train climbed toward them, the air thinned and cooled and tasted of something I had never tasted before. Freedom, or perhaps just the absence of everything I had known. The train pulled into South Pass City on November 15th, exactly as planned. I stepped onto the wooden platform with one small trunk containing everything I owned in the world. 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, my mother's ring, a Bible with my grandmother's handwriting in the margins, and the compass that had been my father's, the one he carried on every voyage, the one they found in his coat pocket after they pulled his body from the sea. South Pass City was smaller than I had imagined, and I had not imagined much. A main street lined with wooden buildings weathered gray by wind and sun, their false fronts giving them a look of ambition that the rest of their construction did not support. A general store, a saloon with bat-wing doors, a livery stable that smelled of horse and hay from 50 yards away, a church small and white, and leaning slightly to the left as if even the house of God could not stand perfectly upright in this wind. Mountains loomed in every direction, their peaks heavy with snow. The wind came down off them sharp and constant, carrying the smell of pine and cold stone, and something else, something wild and ancient that had no name but made my blood move faster in my veins. The air was different here, thin and clean and cold enough to burn my lungs when I breathed deeply. I coughed and Mrs. Crane, who had disembarked beside me, patted my back. You will adjust. Everyone coughs the first few days. The altitude takes getting used to. She helped me with my trunk, lifting one end with a strength that belied her years. The post office is just there, she said, pointing to a squat building with a hand-painted sign that read U.S. Postal Service in letters that were starting to peel. You will want to let them know you have arrived. I nodded, suddenly terrified in a way I had not been at any point during the 8-day journey. On the train, the future had been theoretical, an idea I was moving toward. Now it was here, concrete and immediate, waiting for me in a town that smelled of horse manure and wood smoke and the particular loneliness of places that have been forgotten by the rest of the world. What if they had changed their minds? What if the letter had been some cruel joke? Four bored men amusing themselves at the expense of a desperate girl. What if I had traveled 1,000 miles to find nothing but laughter and closed doors? But when I entered the post office, the clerk's face brightened with recognition. He was a small man with enormous sideburns in the energetic manner of someone who considers his position the center of the universe. Miss Hartwell, he grinned broadly, showing teeth stained brown by tobacco. The Caldwell brothers have been checking for you daily, every single day for the past 2 weeks, and one of them rides down from the mountain to ask if you have arrived. They are out at the livery stable right now, loading supplies. They will be pleased. Are they? I paused, unsure how to phrase what I wanted to ask. Are they what you expected? The clerk's grin widened into something that was half amusement and half warning. Ma'am, nobody expects the Caldwell brothers, but they are good men, solid. You could do considerably worse, and in this territory most women do. Mrs. Crane walked with me to the livery stable. Our boots crunched on the frozen mud of Main Street, and I was aware of people watching from windows and doorways. A young woman in a blue traveling dress walking toward a meeting with four men she had never seen. In a town this small, that was entertainment enough for a month of gossip. The livery stable was a large structure at the end of the street, its doors open despite the November cold. The smell reached me first. Hay and horse and leather and manure and something else, something masculine and wild that had no equivalent in my Boston experience. It was the smell of men who worked outdoors in all weather, who sweated and strained and did not spend their evenings in drawing rooms debating philosophy. Then I saw them. Four men stood near a wagon, and for a moment my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. They were not identical, but they shared something fundamental in their construction, something that spoke of common blood and common labor. The same powerful build, as if their bodies had been designed by a craftsman who favored function over elegance. The same height, ranging from perhaps 6'1" to 6'4". The same dark hair, though one wore his longer than the others, tied back with a leather cord. They were loading supplies onto the wagon, and the November cold apparently meant nothing to them because their sleeves were rolled to the elbows and their collars were open, and they moved with the easy efficiency of men who had been doing this kind of work since before they could shave. Their arms were thick as fence posts, their hands large and calloused, and scars marked their skin in various places. The casual damage of lives lived hard. Rope burns on palms, white lines on forearms from old knife cuts, and on the tallest one, the puckered mark of a bullet wound on his left shoulder, healed but still visible. These were not the men I had known in Boston. Those men wore suits and carried walking sticks and hired other men to do their heavy lifting. Those men had soft hands and softer voices and hid their cruelties behind manners that cost nothing. The men standing before me were something else entirely. Forces of nature given human form. Mountains made of muscle and scar tissue and silence. The tallest one saw me first. He set down the crate he was carrying effortlessly despite its obvious weight and stepped forward. His eyes were gray as winter sky, pale and clear and sharp, the kind of eyes that miss nothing and give nothing away. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a thin white line that pulled slightly at the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent expression of faint skepticism. Miss Hartwell. His voice was deep, rough, as gravel dragged across stone. Not unpleasant, but not gentle either. The voice of a man who used words the way he used tools, with precision and economy and no wasted effort. I am Ronan. These are my brothers. He gestured to each in turn. Beckett, Hollis, Phelan. My hand disappeared completely in his when I extended it for a handshake. His palm engulfed mine the way a bear's paw might engulf a child's glove, rough and warm and callous to the point of being almost abrasive. But his grip was careful, calibrated, the grip of a man who knows his own strength and chooses precisely how much of it to deploy. The second brother, Beckett, was slightly shorter than Ronan, but no less imposing. Lean where Ronan was broad, with intelligent, dark brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. He wore his hair tied back, and his face had the angular precision of a man who spent more time thinking than speaking. His smile was measured, offered like a handshake, rather than given freely. Call me Beckett. Welcome to Wyoming, Miss Hartwell. His voice was quieter than Ronan's, more considered, each word selected and placed with care. The third brother, Hollis, was clean-shaven, with blue eyes that held something I recognized immediately and instinctively. Compassion. Not the performative compassion of Boston philanthropists who donated to charities so their names would appear in the newspaper, but the deep practiced compassion of someone who had seen suffering up close and had chosen to spend his life alleviating it rather than looking away. Hollis, he said and nodded respectfully, but everyone calls me Holly. We are glad you made it safely. And the fourth, the youngest, Phelan. He leaned against the wagon with his arms crossed, and everything about his posture communicated a reckless energy that the other three had either never possessed or had long since disciplined out of themselves. He was 21, just 2 years older than me, and he had a grin that could have lit a room with no lamp. Dark brown eyes that danced with mischief, and something else, a wildness that had not yet been tamed by responsibility or loss. He reminded me of a young horse, all power and no patience, ready to bolt toward the horizon at any moment. Phelan, he said, but you will end up calling me Phelan anyway, because nobody can think of a decent nickname for it. Lord knows they have tried. He pushed off the wagon and straightened, and I noticed he was the shortest of the four, though at 6'1" he would have towered over every man in my Boston acquaintance. You are even prettier than your photograph, Miss Hartwell. And that photograph was something. Phelan. Ronan's voice carried a warning that required only his brother's name to communicate. What I am being complimentary. Is that not what we are supposed to do? Phelan grinned at me entirely unrepentant. Ignore him. He practices being intimidating in the mirror every morning. Despite my terror, despite the 1,000 miles and the 8 days and the 4 graves in Boston and the absolute uncertainty of everything that lay ahead, I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. Thank you for agreeing to. I forced words past the tightness in my throat, past the knot of fear and hope and exhaustion that had lodged there somewhere around Nebraska and showed no signs of dissolving. For agreeing to marry you, Ronan finished. His gray eyes studied my face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow was not. He was not assessing me the way Victor had cataloging weaknesses and vulnerabilities. He was looking at me the way a man looks at a bridge he is about to cross, checking, not for flaws but for strength, asking not whether I would break, but whether I would hold. We made a promise, he said. We keep our promises. We have prepared a room for you at Mrs. Crane's boarding house, Hollis said gently, stepping forward. His voice carried the same calm professionalism that would later become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. You will stay there until the wedding. Give you time to settle in, time to be sure. And if you decide we are too much to handle, Phelan added, that irrepressible grin still firmly in place. We will pay your fare back east, no hard feelings. Well, maybe a few hard feelings on my part, but I will get over it. Phelan. This time it was Beckett who spoke the warning, his quiet voice somehow carrying more authority than a shout. I looked at each of them in turn. Ronan with his scars and commanding presence, and the weight of leadership sitting on his shoulders like a physical thing. Beckett with his calculating intelligence and his eyes that missed nothing. Hollis with his quiet compassion and his healer's hands. Phelan with his youth and fire and the reckless light that burned behind his grin. 4 men, each so different from the others. Each offering something I needed, though I did not yet know what those things were, or how desperately I would come to depend on them. I am not going back, I said. My voice was clear, steady, the voice of a woman who has looked into an open grave and decided that any direction is better than down. I made a promise, too. Something shifted in Ronan's expression. Not a smile, not exactly, but a softening of that permanent skepticism, a slight relaxation of the muscles around his eyes that suggested approval or relief, or perhaps just the recognition of one survivor greeting another. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell him, wood smoke and clean sweat and pine resin, and something else, something I would later learn to identify as simply him, the particular scent of Ronan Caldwell that was as unique and unmistakable as a fingerprint. Close enough that his shadow fell over me and I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. November 18th, Miss Hartwell, he said. His voice had dropped to something just above a whisper, and his breath stirred the loose hair near my ear. 3 days from now, you will stand before God and become our wife. Every nerve in my body fired at once. fear and anticipation, and something electric I could not name, something that started in my chest and radiated outward through my limbs like heat from a stove, like the first sip of whiskey I would later learn to drink, like the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. Mrs. Crane touched my arm gently. "Come on, dear. Let us get you settled. You look like you have not slept in a week." "I have not." "Then it is a good thing I make the best coffee at South Pass City. We will get some food in you and some rest, and tomorrow you can start getting to know these boys properly." I let her lead me away from the livery stable, away from the wagon and the horses and the four men who stood watching me go. I felt their eyes on my back like 4 points of heat, four separate fires burning through the fabric of my dress, following me down the frozen street toward Mrs. Crane's boarding house and the small room that would be mine for 3 more days. 3 more days of being Evangeline Hartwell. 3 more days of belonging to no one. And then for better or worse, for joy or disaster, for whatever waited on the other side of 4 sets of vows, I would belong to all of them. That night alone in the narrow bed at Mrs. Crane's boarding house, I lay awake and listened to the wind come down off the mountains. It sounded different from the wind in Boston, which was a civilized wind broken by buildings and trees and the accumulated barriers of a city that had spent 2 centuries taming its weather. This wind was unbroken, uninterrupted, carrying the cold of snowfields and the loneliness of high places and the howl of distances so vast that sound itself seemed to stretch and distort across them. Through the window I could see stars, more stars than I had ever seen in my life, more than I had believed existed. In Boston, the sky held perhaps a few dozen visible points of light, dimmed by gas lamps and coal smoke, and the general luminous haze of civilization. Here the sky was a riot of light. Thousands of stars, millions perhaps, scattered across the darkness like spilled diamonds on black velvet. I stared at them and thought about what I had agreed to, what tomorrow would bring, what the day after tomorrow would bring, what November 18th would bring, and all the days after that, stretching out into a future so unknown, it might as well have been written in a language I had not yet learned. I thought about my mother sleeping her morphine sleep in a rented room in Boston, her daughter's letter on the pillow beside her. By now she would have read it. By now she would know I was gone. By now she would be alone in a way that no amount of morphine could soften, and the guilt of that, the raw, bleeding guilt of leaving a dying woman alone, pressed on my chest like a stone. "I will send money," I had promised. "I will come back for you." But even as I made those promises in my letter, I had known they might be lies. The kind frontier does not let you come and go as you please. It takes you in and keeps you in the life you left behind, becomes a story you tell yourself at night, growing more distant, with each telling, until it is not even a memory anymore, but a memory of a memory faded and unreliable. But I also thought about the four men in the livery stable, their size and strength, and the way they had looked at me not with hunger or predation, but with something I could only call hope. Four men who had placed an advertisement in a newspaper and waited weeks for a response, checking the post office every day, riding down from their mountain in the cold to ask a clerk if their future had arrived yet. They wanted me, not the way Victor wanted me, as a possession to be used and discarded. They wanted me the way you want a missing piece of something, the part that completes a picture, that makes a house a home, that turns four solitary men into a family. Or maybe I was romanticizing. Maybe I was projecting my own desperate need for belonging onto four strangers who might turn out to be just as monstrous as Victor, just better at hiding it. Maybe I was trading one grave for four, but Mrs. Crane knew them. Mrs. Crane, who had survived 11 years alone on the frontier, who ran a business and managed her own affairs and did not suffer fools. Mrs. Crane said they were good men. Hard but honest, fair dealers, the kind of men who paid their bills and tipped their hats and did not start fights. That had to count for something. Sleep came eventually, pulled me under like a current, and my last conscious thought was of Ronan's gray eyes and the way his voice had dropped to a whisper when he said November 18th. 3 days. 3 days until I became someone else entirely. The thought should have terrified me, and part of it did, the rational part, the Boston part, the part that had been raised on propriety and social convention, and the firm belief that a woman's reputation was her most valuable possession. But another part of me, a part I was only just discovering, a part that had been sleeping beneath the surface of my carefully constructed Boston girlhood like a seed waiting for the right conditions to germinate, That part felt something else entirely. Anticipation. And as I drifted towards sleep in that narrow bed in South Pass City, Wyoming territory, with the wind howling off the mountains and the stars blazing overhead, and four strangers waiting 3 days away, I held that feeling close and let it warm me against the cold. It was all I had. It would have to be enough. The morning of November 16th dawned cold and clear, the kind of cold that has weight and substance that presses against your skin like a hand and makes the air feel solid in your lungs. I woke before sunrise in the narrow bed at Mrs. Crane's boarding house, my stomach tight with nerves and my mind already racing through what the day would hold. Through the frosted window, I could see the mountains rising like sentinels against the sky that was just beginning to lighten at its eastern edge, the deep black softening to indigo, then to a pale gray that promised sun. The peaks were enormous from here, close enough to feel oppressive, their snow-covered shoulders catching the first faint light and holding it the way a mirror holds flame. 2 days until the wedding. 2 days until everything changed. Mrs. Crane brought me breakfast at 7. Eggs scrambled with dried herbs, toast made from bread she had baked that morning, coffee so strong it could have stripped paint from a barn door. She set the tray on the small table by the window and sat across from me, her weathered hands wrapped around her own cup, watching me not eat with the patient concern of a woman who has seen nerves before and knows that food is the last thing a body wants when the mind is consumed with fear. Eat, she said, not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone who has learned that kindness without practicality is just sentiment. Whatever happens today, it will go better on a full stomach than an empty one. I managed a few bites of egg, a corner of toast. The coffee I drank gratefully, letting its bitterness cut through the muck of sleeplessness and anxiety. The brothers asked to visit you today, Mrs. Crane said after I had eaten what I could. One at a time. Each wants to speak with you privately before the wedding. I told them that was proper, but only if you agree, and only in my parlor with the door open and me within earshot. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Evie. She used my first name, something she had not done before. The intimacy of it startled me like a hand reaching through darkness to find mine. You can still say no. Right up until the minister asks for your consent, you can walk away. I will put you on a train myself if that is what you want. I know. Do you? Her eyes searched mine with the same unflinching directness I was beginning to recognize as the fundamental characteristic of everyone who lived in this territory. There was no room for polite evasion out here. The land was too harsh, the distances too vast, the margin for error too thin. People said what they meant because there was no time or energy for anything else. Because once you say those vows, once you belong to them, there is no going back. Not legally, not morally, not in any way that matters. You will be theirs, Evangeline, body and soul, and every day that follows for the rest of your natural life. I met her gaze steadily. I saw 4 women buried in a garden, Mrs. Crane. 4 women who said yes to one man and paid for it with their lives. Whatever the Caldwell brothers are, whatever they want from me, they are honest about it. They put it in a newspaper advertisement for the whole world to read. That is more honesty than Victor Prescott ever offered anyone. She nodded slowly. Something in her expression shifted, settled the way sediment settles in a glass of water after being stirred. She had been testing me, I realized. Not to be cruel, but to be sure. To satisfy herself that the girl sitting at her breakfast table understood the weight of what she was about to do. Then let us get you ready to meet your future, she said. Ronan came first at 9 in the morning. Mrs. Crane showed him into the small parlor where I waited, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. The room was modestly furnished, a settee covered in faded floral fabric, 2 wooden chairs with cushions that had been repaired more than once, a small table holding a kerosene lamp, and a shelf of books that Mrs. Crane had accumulated over her years in South Pass. The fireplace crackled with fresh wood, throwing warmth and dancing light across the walls. Ronan filled the doorway the way a boulder fills a stream bed, completely and without apology. He had to duck slightly to enter, and once inside the parlor, seemed to shrink around him. The ceiling suddenly lowered, the walls closer. The furniture sized for children rather than men. He brought the smell of cold air and pine and horse leather with him, and it displaced the domestic smells of coffee and beeswax and Mrs. Crane's dried lavender as thoroughly as a storm displaces calm. Miss Hartwell, He removed his hat, holding it in both hands in front of his chest. His dark hair was neatly combed, still damp from washing, and his face was freshly shaved. The scar on his temple stood out pale and precise against his tan skin, a thin white line that told a story I did not yet know. "Mr. Caldwell." "Ronan," he corrected. His voice was gentler than it had been at the livery stable, as if the confined space of the parlor required him to modulate his natural volume the way a man carrying a lantern adjusts its brightness for a small room. "We are past formalities now, I think." He sat in the chair across from me, and even sitting he seemed enormous. His knees nearly touched mine in the narrow space between our seats, and his hands resting on his thighs were large enough that each one could have covered both of mine with room to spare. "I need to be clear with you about something," he said without preamble. No small talk, no pleasantries, no easing into the conversation. He spoke the way he moved, with directness and purpose, in an economy that wasted nothing. "I am the eldest. In our family, that means I lead. In matters of safety, of survival, of protecting what is ours, my word is final. Not because I am smarter than my brothers, though Beckett would argue that point, but because someone has to make the hard calls, and they fall to me. Can you accept that?" I considered his words carefully, turning them over the way you turn a stone in your hand, checking for sharp edges. "You are asking if I will obey you." "In matters of life and death, yes. Without hesitation, without debate. Up in those mountains, hesitation kills. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to get down, you get down. If I tell you to hide and not come out until I call for you, you do exactly that. No questions, no arguments, no looking back. Can you do that?" The intensity in his gray eyes made my breath catch. This was not a man who asked questions to which he expected anything other than honest answers. This was not a man who played games with words or hid meanings behind pleasant phrases. He was laying down the terms of something, a contract perhaps, or a covenant, and he needed to know that I understood every clause before I signed. "What about in other matters?" I asked. "Matters that are not life and death." A ghost of a smile crossed his face there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Then we discuss. I am not a tyrant, Evangeline. I do not want a servant or a slave. I want a partner. Someone who will argue with me when I am wrong and support me when I am right, and know the difference between the two." "And the other brothers, do they accept your authority?" "They accept it because they have seen what happens when nobody leads. Case. Indecision. Good men dying because nobody was willing to make the call that needed making." He paused and something dark moved behind his eyes, a shadow of memory that he chose not to share. "Not yet." "Why would danger come?" I asked. "You are ranchers. What kind of danger threatens a ranch in the mountains?" His jaw tightened. The muscles along its line stood out beneath his skin like cables under tension. "Because we made enemies before we came to these mountains. Powerful enemies with long memories and deep pockets and the kind of resources that can reach across 1,000 miles if given enough time and motivation." "Who?" "I cannot tell you more than that. Not yet. Not until you have said your vows and become family, because what I am carrying is dangerous knowledge and I will not put it in the hands of anyone who might still walk away." He held up a hand to forestall my objection. "That is not an insult to your character. It is simple caution, the kind that has kept my brothers alive for 4 years." I thought about Victor Prescott's journal, about the careful clinical notes written in perfect penmanship, about the senator's safe with its predictable combination, about the way power and secrecy intertwined like vines on a trellis, each supporting the other, each drawing strength from the connection. "I understand caution," I said, "and I promise. In matters of safety, I will obey you without question." Ronan's shoulders relaxed slightly, a settling of tension that I would later learn to read the way sailors read weather. He reached across the small space between us and took my hand. His palm engulfed mine completely, rough and warm, and I could feel the calluses on his fingers like the rings of a tree, each one a record of labor of seasons spent gripping axes and reins and whatever else needed gripping. "There is something else I want you to know," he said, and his voice changed. Not softer exactly, but deeper, as if he were reaching down into a part of himself that rarely saw daylight. "I have led my brother since I was 16 years old. Our father was a homesteader, a good man who came west to build something from nothing. He died when I was 16, killed by a grizzly bear on the north ridge of our first property while checking trap lines in spring. His thumb moved across my knuckles, a slow, absent motion, as if he were not aware he was doing it. I was the one who found him, what was left of him. I was the one who walked back to the cabin and told 3 boys under the age of 14 that their father was gone and that from now on I was all they had. He paused. Beckett was 12. Hollis was 10. Phelan was just 8 years old, and he did not stop crying for a week. I did not know how to be a father. I was a boy myself. But I learned because the alternative was watching my brother starve or freeze or be swallowed by a territory that does not care about orphans. The firelight played across his scarred face, and I saw something in his expression that I had not expected. Not the hardness I had braced for, not the commanding authority he had been describing. Weariness, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a weight too heavy for one pair of shoulders since before he was old enough to shave. I do not know how to be anything other than the one who protects, he said quietly. It is the only thing I have ever been good at. And I need you to understand that when I give orders, it is not because I want to control you. It is because I have already buried a father and I cannot bury anyone else. I will not survive it. The rawness of the admission stunned me. This mountain of a man, this force of nature who could lift a full crate with one arm and whose presence made rooms feel too small, had just shown me the soft place beneath his armor, the wound that had never healed, the boy who had found his father's body and spent the rest of his life making sure no one he loved would meet the same end. I understand, I said, and I did, better than he knew, because I had watched my own father disappear beneath the waves, had received the news of his drowning from a stranger in a uniform, had felt the ground open beneath me in a way that it would never fully close again. November 18th, he said, rising to his feet, but still holding my hand, pulling me gently upward with him. You will become ours. And I swear to you on my father's grave that I will protect you with everything I have, with my life if it comes to that. He cupped my face in both palms, his hands so large that my entire head seemed to fit between them, like a bird between sheltering wings. He held me there for a moment, his gray eyes inches from mine, and I saw in them the full scope of what he was offering. Not just protection, not just authority, but the fierce, consuming devotion of a man who had been denied the chance to save his father and had spent every day since making up for it. He left without kissing me, but the ghost of his hands remained on my skin like a brand warm and indelible. Beckett arrived at noon precisely. Not approximately noon, not around midday. Noon exactly, as if he had been watching a clock and timed his approach to the minute. I would learn that this was characteristic. Beckett did nothing approximately. His mind operated on precision, the way a watch operates on springs, every gear meshing with every other gear, every calculation feeding into the next. He was leaner than Ronan, with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see not just the surface of things, but the layers beneath the hidden architecture, the structural supports that held appearances in place. He carried a book under his arm, held against his body, with the protective instinct of a man who understands that books are more than paper and ink. Miss Hartwell, he sat without being invited, crossing one leg over the other, with an ease that suggested he was comfortable in parlors, comfortable in conversations, comfortable in the world of words and ideas in a way that his eldest brother was not. The book rested on his knee, its leather binding worn soft with use, the spine cracked in multiple places from being opened again and again to favorite passages. I brought you something, he said, and handed me the volume. It was a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. Not a new edition, but a well-loved one, the pages yellowed, the margins filled with notes in a neat, precise hand that I recognized from the letter I had received in Boston. Beckett's handwriting, small and careful and deliberate, each annotation a conversation with the text, a dialogue between reader and writer that spans centuries. Ronan told you he leads in matters of survival, Beckett had said while I turned the pages. That is true, and I do not contest it. My brother is the strongest man I have ever known, and when danger comes, there is no one I would rather have standing between it and the people I love. But strength without strategy is just violence. And in matters of strategy, of planning, of thinking 3 moves ahead, while everyone else is still reacting to the first, that is my role. He spoke calmly without boastfulness, stating facts the way a surveyor states measurements. This is the height of the mountain. This is the depth of the river. This is how my mind works. I need a partner who can think, he continued, who can see patterns where others see chaos, who will not just follow orders but understand why they are given, and who can adapt when circumstances change faster than orders can be issued. Can you be that? I looked up from the book. You want me to think for myself. I want you to think with us. 4 minds are better than one, but only if all 4 are actually engaged. A family where only one person thinks is not a family. It is a dictatorship with dependence. I almost smiled. That sounds like something you have said to Ronan. Many times. He does not always appreciate it. The faintest hint of humor crossed Beckett's face, the shadow of a smile that softened his angular features. Here is what you need to know about our situation, Evangeline. What Ronan would not tell you until after the vows, but what I believe you deserve to know before them. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to a register that was meant for the space between 2 people and no further. We were Pinkerton detectives, all 4 of us. We joined the agency after our father died because it paid well and because we were young and angry and wanted to believe that justice was something you could enforce with a badge and a revolver. He paused, letting the words settle. Pinkerton detectives. I knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Alan Pinkerton's National Detective Agency, famous for breaking up criminal gangs and guarding presidents and conducting investigations that no local sheriff had the resources or the courage to pursue. We were assigned to investigate a land baron named Aldrich Vane, Beckett continued, a man of significant wealth and political connections based in Denver, with holdings across 3 territories. Our employer suspected Vane of fraud, of using forged deeds and bribery to acquire land that did not belong to him. What we discovered was far worse. His brown eyes held mine, and I saw in them the particular intensity of a man who has uncovered something terrible and has spent years carrying the weight of it. Vane was selling weapons to Apache tribes, rifles, ammunition, dynamite, providing them through intermediaries so his name never appeared on any transaction. Then when the inevitable conflicts erupted between the armed tribes and the surrounding settlers, Vane would swoop in and buy the bloodied land for pennies from families who were desperate to flee. He provoked the very violence that created his opportunities. Dozens of settlers died, entire families, women and children. That is treason, I said. The word came out flat and certain, the way words come when the thing they describe is too large for emphasis. That is profit, Beckett said, and his voice carried a bitterness that had not faded in 4 years. We stole his ledger, the complete record of every transaction, every bribe, every weapon shipment, every parcel of land acquired through blood. We threatened to take it to the U.S. Marshal. What happened? Vane responded by destroying our careers. He had connections in the Pinkerton agency itself, men on his payroll who manufactured evidence of misconduct against us. We were dismissed, our names were blackened, and then 3 other Pinkerton agents who had helped us gather the evidence turned up dead within 6 weeks. One fell from a hotel balcony, one was found floating in the Platte River, one simply disappeared, and his horse was found wandering in the foothills with blood on the saddle. The parlor felt colder despite the fire. Accidents, I said. Arranged accidents. The specialty of men who can afford to pay well for discretion. Beckett straightened. So we disappeared, changed our name. The one we use now is not the one we were born with, but it is the one we have earned. We came to these mountains, bought land where no one would think to look for 4 former lawmen, and built a life that keeps us far from the reach of Aldrich Vane. But you kept the ledger. We kept the ledger. It is our only leverage, our only insurance. If Vane finds us, if his men come for us, that ledger is the only thing that might stay his hand. Because if we die, the ledger goes to the U.S. Marshal anyway. We have arranged for that. And if he finds you despite everything, then we fight. Beckett said it simply without bravado, a statement of fact like weather. That is why we need you to be smart, Evangeline, not just obedient, not just brave. Smart. Watch. Listen. If someone comes to South Pass asking questions about 4 brothers on a mountain, if someone shows too much interest in our affairs, if anything feels wrong in a way you cannot explain, you tell us. even if it seems small, especially if it seems small, because the small things are the ones that kill you. I thought about Victor Prescott's garden, about how a crack in the soil had revealed a skull, about how a locket gleaming in fading light had led to a journal that led to a truth, that led to a train that led to this parlor, and this man in this moment. I can do that, I said. I am good at watching, at noticing things people try to hide. Beckett smiled, and this time it was genuine warm, transforming his angular face from calculating to almost handsome. I believed you might be. Anyone who found 4 bodies in a senator's garden and had the presence of mind to read the evidence, memorize the contents, replace the journal exactly where she found it, and then plan an escape that included recovering stolen money from a safe that is exactly the kind of thinker we need. He stood and offered his hand. When I took it, he held it for a moment, his lean fingers wrapped around mine with a grip that was firm but not crushing. November 18th, he said, when we are married, I will tell you everything. Every detail of the Vane affair, every contingency plan, every escape route. Because you will need to know it all, and because I have been carrying this alone for too long. Ronan carries the weight of command. I carry the weight of knowledge. And knowledge is heavier, Evangeline. It is the heaviest thing in the world. He released my hand and turned toward the door, then paused and looked back. You are going to fit in well with us, Evangeline Hartwell. I can already tell. Hollis came in the afternoon when the sun had reached its highest point and was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. He was the gentlest of the 4 in appearance, with blue eyes that held a depth of compassion I had only seen once before in the eyes of the old priest at St. Mary's, who used to sit with dying parishioners and hold their hands and tell them stories about heaven until they stopped being afraid. He carried a small leather bag worn at the corners and fastened with a brass buckle that had been polished smooth by years of opening and closing. A medical bag, the kind field surgeons carried, compact and efficient, every instrument and supply arranged for quick access. I brought medical supplies, he explained, setting the bag on the table beside the kerosene lamp. His voice had a quality I would come to cherish, a calm that was not passive, but active, the deliberate creation of peace in a world that offered none naturally. Before the wedding, I would like to examine you, make sure you are healthy, that there are no conditions that need addressing before you begin life in the mountains. Examine me. I heard the wariness in my own voice. Nothing invasive, heart, lungs, basic reflexes. The mountains are hard on the body, and I want to make sure yours is ready for what is coming. He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. Mrs. Crane can stay in the room if that makes you more comfortable. I was a field medic during the conflicts. I know how to keep things professional. I studied him. This quiet man with his healer's hands and his carefully organized medical bag and his blue eyes that seemed to absorb pain from the world around him and transmute it into something manageable. There was a stillness about him that the others lacked, a centeredness, as if he had found some fixed point inside himself and anchored everything to it. Tomorrow, I said, for the examination. Today I want to talk. He accepted this with a nod and sat across from me. His posture was different from his brother's. Where Ronan sat like a king on a throne, and Beckett sat like a chess player, studying the board, Hollis sat like a man who was used to sitting beside beds, leaning forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on the person in front of him. What would you like to know? Ronan told me about your father, about the bear. He said he found the body. A shadow crossed Hollis's face. Yes, Ronan was 16. He carried that weight alone for a long time before any of us were old enough to share it. How old were you? 10, old enough to understand death, young enough to believe that if I learned enough about medicine, about healing, I could prevent it. He paused. That is why I became a medic. Not because I was fascinated by anatomy or science, though I was, but because I watched my brother carry our father's blood on his clothes, and I swore I would learn to stop the bleeding, to fix what was broken, to keep the people I loved from ending up on the ground. And could you fix what was broken? His eyes met mine, and I saw in them something I recognized. The particular sorrow of people who have dedicated their lives to an impossible task and know it is impossible but keep doing it anyway. Sometimes, not always. The first surgery I ever performed in the field was on a boy named Thomas Crane, 17 years old. A bullet had shattered his femur, and the bone fragments were cutting into the artery. I saved his leg, or at least enough of it for him to walk with a crutch. But I could not save the leg itself. I amputated below the knee while he screamed, and 2 men held him down. He spoke without self-pity, without drama. Just facts delivered in that calm, measured voice that treated truth as something to be handled carefully but never avoided. After that, I swore something to myself, that I would never cause pain to anyone if I had the power to prevent it. Not on a battlefield, not in a surgery, not in a home. Pain is not a teacher. Pain is what happens when teaching fails. He looked at me with those blue eyes, steady and certain. That is what I bring to this marriage, Evangeline. The promise that you will never suffer at my hands. That when you are frightened or hurt or overwhelmed, you can come to me and I will make it better. Or die trying. And the wedding night, I asked. The question came out before I could stop it, carried on a current of anxiety I had been damming for days. What should I expect? Hollis did not blush or deflect. He answered the way he answered everything, with the honesty of a man who believes that truth, even uncomfortable truth, is always preferable to ignorance. You are a virgin. Your body has never known a man's touch in that way. The first time will involve some pain. There is no avoiding that entirely. But if done with patience and care, the pain will be brief and bearable. He spoke as calmly as if discussing the weather or the price of grain. Clinical, professional. And somehow that professionalism was more comforting than any amount of tender reassurance could have been. I will be first. That was agreed among us. Because I am the most patient, the most careful, and because your comfort matters more to me than anything else. And if it is too much, if I cannot bear it, then you say stop, and everything stops immediately, without question, without argument, without a moment's hesitation. His voice was firm, the firmness of a vow. We are not animals, Evangeline. We are men who want a wife, not a victim. Your safety, your comfort, your well-being, those are not negotiable. They are the foundation that everything else is built upon. Something tight in my chest loosened, a knot I had been carrying since I first read Ronan's letter in the Boston Library, a knot made of fear and ignorance, and the terrible images my imagination had conjured in the dark hours of the train journey. It did not dissolve entirely, but it loosened enough to let me breathe. Ronan says he is demanding, I said. Beckett says he wants honesty. What do you want from me, Hollis? He reached across the space between us and took both my hands in his. His fingers were long and precise, the fingers of a surgeon, and despite the calluses that frontier life had laid over them, they held mine with a delicacy that made me think of hummingbirds, of things that are stronger than they appear. I want you to feel safe, he said. I want you to trust that we will never hurt you, deliberately. Never take more than you can give, never ask for more than you are willing to offer. I want you to know that when the world is too much, when the cold is too deep, or the fear is too great, or the loneliness of those mountains presses in on you until you cannot breathe, you can come to me, and I will make it better. Like a healer, like a husband who believes that the most important thing a man can do is make sure the people he loves are not afraid. He stood and raised my fingers to his lips, pressing a kiss against my knuckles that was so gentle I barely felt it. But the warmth of it radiated up my arm and into my chest and settled there like an ember. Tomorrow I will examine you, nothing to be nervous about, the day after we marry. And that night I will show you that what happens between a husband and wife does not have to be frightening. It can be something else entirely. What? He smiled. Beautiful. Then he was gone, and I sat alone in the parlor with the fire crackling and his word hanging in the air like a promise. Beautiful. I had never applied that word to what happened between a man and a woman. In my limited understanding, shaped by whispered conversations between married women at Boston tea parties, and the terrifying implications of Victor Prescott's journal intimacy, was something women endured. Something that was done to them rather than shared with them. A duty, a price, a transaction. Hollis made it sound like something else, like a gift, like art, like the first time you hear a piece of music so perfect, it makes you forget that the world contains anything ugly at all. Phelan came last as the sun was setting and painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson that no artist could have replicated. He arrived with his characteristic energy, entering the parlor the way weather enters a room, all motion and noise, and the sense that something interesting was about to happen. Save the best for last, he announced with that grin, the one that could have powered every lamp in South Pass City. He dropped into the chair and stretched his long legs out in front of him, crossing his ankles, looking for all the world like a man settling in for an evening of entertainment rather than a conversation that would determine the course of 5 lives. So, what did my brothers tell you? Let me guess. He held up fingers as he counted. Ronan said he is in charge and you should do what he says. Beckett said we are all in terrible danger from a nefarious land baron. Hollis said he will be gentle as a lamb and you have nothing to worry about. He raised an eyebrow. How close am I? Despite everything, despite the weight of the day and the accumulation of revelations and the constant hum of anxiety that had become the background music of my existence, I smiled. A real smile, not the careful, calculated expression I had worn like a mask in Victor Prescott's presence for months. A smile that started somewhere deep in my chest and worked its way up through layers of fear and exhaustion and arrived on my face feeling like sunshine after weeks of rain. Something like that, I said. All true, every word. Ronan is a born commander who would have been a general if the army had found him before the Pinkertons did. Beckett is the smartest person I have ever met, including 2 professors at the University of Colorado who told him he should have been a lawyer. And Hollis can sew up a knife wound while whistling hymns and never miss a stitch. He leaned forward and the grin softened into something more genuine, more vulnerable. But here is what they did not tell you because none of them would think to say it. They are all so serious all the time, Ronan with his commands and his responsibility. Beckett with his strategies and his contingency plans, Hollis with his doctoring and his worry. Someone in this family needs to make sure you remember how to laugh. And that is your role. That is my privilege. He said the word without irony, without the self-deprecation that usually accompanies a youngest sibling's description of their place in the family. He meant it. Look, I am the youngest. I know that. I make mistakes. I am hot-headed. I rush into things the way a horse rushes toward an open gate without much thought for what is on the other side. My brothers will tell you I am reckless, and they are right. I have been reckless since I was 8 years old and our father died, and I decided that the best way to handle a world that takes people from you without warning is to live as fast and as hard as possible so you do not miss anything. The words landed with more weight than he probably intended. Behind the grin and the bravado and the restless energy, I could see something else. A boy of 8 who wept for a week when his father died. A boy who grew up in the shadow of 3 older brothers who loved him fiercely but could not replace what he had lost. A boy who had turned his grief into motion, into speed, into the headlong rush toward life that looked like recklessness from the outside but was really something else entirely. It was refusal to be still long enough for sorrow to catch him. I am also loyal of my bones, he continued, and his voice dropped the playfulness like a coat he no longer needed. I will fight like hell to protect what is mine. And come November 18th, you will be mine, Evangeline, just as much as you are Ronan's or Beckett's or Hollis's. Not a fraction of me, not a quarter portion, all of me. Every reckless, hot-headed, impulsive inch. What do you want from me, Phelan? His brown eyes held mine, and for a moment the boy vanished, and the man appeared, and I saw in him a depth that the grin usually concealed. I want you to enjoy your life, not just survive it, not just endure it the way women are taught to endure things with patience and resignation and a stiff upper lip. I want to hear you laugh until your ribs hurt. I want to see you run in the snow for no reason other than the joy of running. I want you to look at those mountains every morning and feel lucky instead of trapped. He stood and crossed to me, taking both my hands and pulling me to my feet. He was the shortest of the 4 brothers, but standing this close, I still had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. And I want you to forgive me when I inevitably do something stupid. He added, the grin returning like the sun after a cloud. Because I will. We have been alone in those mountains for 4 years, and I have forgotten most of what I ever knew about being around a woman, which was not much to begin with. You seem to be managing fine right now. That is because I am trying very hard to impress you, and also because Mrs. Crane threatened to hit me with a skillet if I said anything inappropriate. I laughed, actually laughed a sound I had not heard from my own throat in so long that it startled me like finding a flower blooming in snow. Phelan's face lit up. There, that is what I wanted. That is worth more than anything else that will happen this week. He released one of my hands but kept the other and led me toward the door of the boarding house. Come outside with me for a minute. I want to show you something. Mrs. Crane looked up from her knitting as we passed through the kitchen. Where are you going? Just outside. 2 minutes. I have promised to behave. That will be a first, Mrs. Crane muttered, but she waved us on. The evening air hit me like a wall of cold glass. After the warmth of the parlor, the November twilight felt like stepping into a river, shocking, embracing, and alive. The sky above South Pass City had deepened to a purple, so dark it was almost black, and the first stars were beginning to appear, faint pinpricks of light in the infinite darkness. Then more appeared, and more, and more. Within minutes, the sky was blazing. Not just stars, but rivers of stars, oceans of stars, a dome of light so vast and intricate that my mind could not process it. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a banner of spilled cream, and around it countless other lights burned in patterns. I had no names for constellations I had never seen, because the sky over Boston was too dim and too small to contain them. I stood on the wooden porch of Mrs. Crane's boarding house and stared upward with my mouth open, and I forgot about everything. About Victor, about the garden, about the four brothers and the wedding and the impossible future that was hurtling toward me. I forgot all of it because the sky had erased it, had made it small and temporary and insignificant in the face of something so beautiful it hurt. Did you ever see this many stars in Boston? Phelan asked quietly. He was standing beside me close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body through the cold air, but not touching me. Just there, present. Never, I whispered. I did not know there were this many. This is why we stay, he said. His voice had lost its usual playful energy, replaced by something quieter, something that sounded almost like reverence. Not because we are hiding, not because we are afraid of Aldrich Vane or his hired killers or whatever Beckett told you about our past. We stay because this is the only place on earth where we have ever felt free. He turned to look at me, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. That is what I want for you, Evangeline. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from finding the place where you belong and deciding to stay. We stood there for a long time, two people on a porch in a small town at the edge of the known world, watching the universe reveal itself one star at a time. When the cold finally drove us inside, Phelan squeezed my hand once and released it. See you at the wedding, wife, he said, and the grin was back, but gentler now, warmed by starlight, and the particular intimacy of sharing something beautiful with someone you are just beginning to know. That night I lay awake in the dark, thinking about what each brother had revealed. Ronan's strength and the burden of command he had carried since he was 16 years old and found his father's body on a mountain ridge. Beckett's intelligence and the dangerous knowledge he guarded like a weapon. Hollis's compassion and the promise that safety, not submission, was the foundation of everything he offered. Phelan's fire and the grief that burned beneath his reckless joy. 4 men, each so different from the others, each broken in ways they had learned to hide, each offering something I needed, though I was only beginning to understand what those things were. Mrs. Crane knocked softly and entered without waiting for an answer. She sat on the edge of my bed and the mattress dipped under her weight, and the gesture was so motherly, so reminiscent of the countless nights my own mother had sat on my bed and smoothed my hair and told me that everything would be all right, that tears rose in my eyes before I could stop them. Having second thoughts, she asked. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted, but not about whether to go through with it, just about whether I will be enough for them. 4 men, Mrs. Crane, 4 broken, extraordinary men who have lost everything and rebuilt it from nothing. What do I bring to that? A trunk full of dresses and a compass that does not work anymore, and the ability to play piano, which is useless in a cabin that does not have one. She laughed softly, the sound warm in the dark room. Child, from what I can see, the question is not whether you will be enough for them. It is whether they will be enough for you. You found 4 bodies in a garden, and your first thought was to steal the evidence. You stole money from a senator's safe with your bare hands. You traveled 1,000 miles alone to marry 4 strangers in the wilderness. You are stronger than you look, Evangeline Hartwell. Stronger than you know. I do not feel strong. Strong people rarely do. They are too busy surviving to notice their own strength. She patted my hand and stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be interesting. She paused at the door. One more thing. Those brothers. I have watched them today, coming and going from my parlor, each one trying so hard to be worthy of you. Ronan, who has never asked anyone for anything in his life, asking for your trust. Beckett, who guards his secrets like gold, sharing them freely. Hollis, who would rather cut off his own hand than cause pain, promising to make your first night painless. And Phelan. She paused. Phelan stood outside in the cold for 10 minutes before he came in, just standing there, looking at my front door. I watched him from the kitchen window. He was talking to himself, rehearsing what he was going to say, practicing his lines like an actor before a show. Why are you telling me this? Because those are not the behaviors of men who want to own you, Evangeline. Those are the behaviors of men who are terrified of losing you. Men who have been alone for 4 years and have forgotten what hope feels like and are scared half to death that the thing they are hoping for will turn around and walk away. She closed the door softly behind her, leaving me alone with the darkness and the wind and the knowledge that tomorrow I would let Hollis examine me, and the day after I would stand before God and 4 men and say the 2 words that would change everything. I do. 2 words, 2 syllables, the smallest bridge in the English language spanning the largest chasm. I closed my eyes and saw stars, millions of them, an infinity of light in an infinity of darkness. And somewhere in that vastness, 4 men on a mountain waiting for a girl from Boston to choose them. I had already chosen. I had chosen the moment I read that advertisement in a yellowed newspaper while 4 skulls grinned up at me from the darkness of my memory. I had chosen the moment I stepped onto that train, the moment I stepped onto that platform, the moment I looked into Ronan's gray eyes and said, I am not going back. All that remained was the saying of it, the making of it official, the crossing of that smallest bridge. 2 more days. 2 more days and Evangeline Hartwell would cease to exist. And in her place, someone new would stand. Someone I had not yet met. Someone I was terrified and thrilled and desperate to become. Evangeline Caldwell, wife to 4 men, woman of the mountains. Whatever that meant, I was about to find out.